Hello, I'd like to take you on a brief tour of the differences between state and federal accountability systems in the state of Wisconsin. This is going to be only a brief view. If you want more comprehensive information, please take a look at the OAA website or the DPI website. So taking a look at this conversation is based on this particular document, which is a crosswalk of both the federal and the state accountability systems, the state school report cards, and the federal ESSA accountability reports. You can find this located on the OAA website as well as the DPI website. That's the document that I'm going to use for the conversation today. First of all, we're going to take a look at some quick comparisons. The first thing we're going to look at is what are the goals of each of these. For the state has a goal of showing everyone that schools are college and career, producing students that are college and career ready, that they are meeting or exceeding the accountability expectations set by the state. And by the state legislature. This is created of many different components. As you are aware that the state school report card has many different sections. The federal goal is within 6 years, we're going to cut the achievement gap in half. For English language arts, mathematics, we're going to increase the graduation rate so that there is no gap between that, or the gap is less than half of what it is now. And also that the English learners in our systems are going to gain proficiency. So it does not specifically give numbers regarding the English learners, but it is an ambitious goal. The purpose, so those are the goals. Now the purpose of the state is to provide information to the public and to schools themselves about driving continuous improvement. So you're going to hear that theme, continuous improvement process, throughout whenever you look at accountability report cards. The federal purpose is to identify schools needing support. So two very different things, and they play out differently. So state is just sharing information, how everybody's doing. The feds are saying, we're going to pick out schools that are needing support. Here's how it plays out. So in the reporting system, the state system is a rating system. This is a key difference between the feds and the state. It's a rating system. You earn points, and then there's a scale. And based on the number of points you have earned as a school, you will fall somewhere on this particular scale. It is independent of other schools in the district. Your score is independent of other schools in the state. It is your score based on your students. The federal system is a ranking system. It ranks schools based on the similar, almost exactly the same information, and ranks them from the lowest to the highest. So if there were 100 schools, you will have no school that has the same rank. Whereas in the state system, if you had 100 schools, all of them could have the same rate, the rating. So the feds, again, looking for schools that need support, are going to be looking at this ranking system and identifying the schools that have the lowest scores based on the data input. So the state is a rating system. The federal is a ranking system. That plays out when we look at some of the labels, and some of you may recognize a few of these from before. I've included some of the older names from the ESSA and No Child Left Behind days. So let's take a closer look at these rankings and what the feds label them. So the very lowest, the most struggling schools are called Comprehensive Support and Improvement, or CSI schools. These used to be what were known as priority schools. These schools are, again, since it's a ranking system, take all the schools, bottom to top, take the lowest 5% of Title I schools based on all student data, not specific groups, but the all category. So looking at all students' achievement proficiency levels in ELA or in mathematics or attendance, etc. Or if you are a school that graduates students, if you graduate fewer than 67% of your students, you are also in this category called Comprehensive Support and Improvement, CSI schools. Moving along a little bit is something called TSI, Targeted Support and Improvement. These are were known as the old focus schools. So we're looking now, instead of at the all student category, we're looking at any of the demographic categories that are listed, both the student demographics, the race and ethnicity, as well as service provisions, which are economically disadvantaged, English learners, and special education. So those three are called service provisions. And then we're also looking at race and ethnicity. Looking at those, again, ranking schools from the lowest to the highest. We're taking the bottom 10%. Doesn't matter if everyone is proficient, according to the state. We're taking the bottom 10% of schools that fall into these categories. So for instance, a very common one in MMSD is Black African American students, and looking at these and labeling these particular schools as needing targeted support and improvement. Finally is additional targeted support and improvement, ATSI, which again is literally a component of the TSI. It's, instead of being the bottom 10%, it's the bottom 5% of the schools. That the only difference between these schools and the CSI schools are the fact that CSI covers all student groups. It also focuses on Title I schools. ATSI does not focus on Title I, and it is specific to student categories. So you could say students with disabilities, that particular category, lowest 5% of schools in the state, you would be labeled ATSI. So that's the labeling and how ranking makes a difference in the designations that are given. Another comparison, we need to talk about some of these indicators or priority areas. In the state, we know them as priority areas. And you would look at student proficiency on the state tests to determine student achievement. We've gotten rid of our participation penalty, which we used to have on the state report cards. The goal has always been 95%, but you are not penalized as a school if you do not achieve 95%. In the federal areas, they're called indicators. Again, there's something called academic achievement. Same data, comes from the same source. However, there is a participation penalty. You are expected to have 95% of your students in each demographic area. So all students and every single other one of those categories, race, ethnicity, and the service provisions, 95% of all students taking the assessment. How does this penalty play out? On the state, it was simply you would dock X number of points off of your total, and that would affect your rating. So you might drop a rating level based on the penalty. In the feds, it does not work that way. Suppose that we have 100 students. You are supposed to test 95 at least. Every single one of those 95 has a score, those students, and that is what goes into creating your academic achievement indicator. Now, suppose you only have 90 students take the test instead of 95. What happens at the federal level is they make up the difference, so 5 students, by giving those 5 students, those students who should have tested, a 0. That then gets added into your total score from the proficiency levels from the assessments, and that is calculated into your academic achievement indicator for the federal. And as we all know, zeros have an incredibly negative impact on student scores, and in this case, on academic achievement for the schools. So it's even more important from the federal perspective to get 95% participation on the assessments. Imagine I said 90, what happens if you had 80 students? That would be 15 students to bring you up to 95. That would then be at 0. So it would make a huge difference on your progress in academic achievement. Continuing on, some differences between the state. The state calls absenteeism, which is another one of our priority indicators. The state of Wisconsin measures chronic absenteeism as being missing 16% of school attendance. So you attend only 84% of the time. And there's evidence-based, this is an evidence-based number that students who are missing more than 16% actually have they struggle mightily. The federal look at this is chronic absenteeism is defined as missing 10%. Now the state recognizes 10%, but they say that the research shows that 10% is a red flag saying, wait, stop and look at this. It is not the edge of the cliff. You're close, you're getting close, whereas 16% is, so to speak, the edge of the cliff. And once you hit that point, you really are going to struggle. The students are really going to struggle. So the federal rate is 10%. The state rate is 16%. So you could be just fine on the state. So if you had students that were missing 14% of the time, they would still count as being in attendance and would not be chronically absent for the state. However, they would be chronically absent for the feds. Okay, how often does this happen? The state looks at things annually, except during COVID when we have put a pause on this. The status, your rating can change annually based on how the points play out. And so if you really have an intensive effort to improve student achievement, you might see that reflected in year 1 of that process, or year 2, in which the state scores would go up, and you may end up moving up one of the levels. The federal look is also an annual. However, identifications are not. So the CSI, the Comprehensive Support and Improvement label, is either for a school or based on graduation rate, is identification once every 3 years, and exiting is once every 3 years. So you can be identified and you can't get off that list for 3 years. If you're not identified in an identification year, you're okay, but keep an eye on that. Targeted support and improvement, since it is only a specific student group, is an annual process. So you can be labeled, identified as a school that has targeted support and improvement in students with disabilities in 1 year, and then a year later you could be, so to speak, not identified, off the list, so to speak. ATSI, because it is such a low percent, you're at the bottom 5% of the schools in the state that are in this particular category, it is also a 3-year identification and exit process. Keep in mind that ATSI, if you go through 2 3-year cycles with this particular listing, does become a CSI. More information about what that represents will be in other videos on this particular website. Finally, required actions. So depending on your score in the state, there is none. Even if you're at the bottom portion of the state accountability report card, you just have to explain to your peers, to your families, why you are failed to meet expectations. However, if you are identified on the federal level, If you're not identified, you're okay. But if you're identified on the federal level, there are several things that you are required to do. First of all, your score in that particular, let's just say that we're identified with students with disabilities in English language arts. Your score in that particular area has to be, in order to get off this list, you have to score higher than the threshold, the cutoff point, from that was in existence for the year you were identified and subsequent years until you are exited. That threshold shifts every year because of student statewide information changing every year. So it is kind of a moving target, so to speak, but you have to be above that. So your score, if it started here, needs to be here, and it needs to be above the threshold for all those years that are in there. So 2 additional years. The second thing that has to happen is your proficiency rates need to exceed in both years the identification year, or the amount that you grew in each one of those interval years has to show improvement. So it could be one or the other. And the third component of this is you have to show evidence that you are sustainably changing the systems in your school through something called the continuous improvement process. This process has a rubric that's been developed by DPI and is available on this, the OAA and the DPI website. So that's a summary of the similarities and differences between the state and the federal programs. If you have questions, please get a hold of me, and I appreciate your time and taking a look at this video.